Hey guys, hi, welcome back once again. My name is Vaishali, and having learned quite a few things from and through human interactions, and having pursued my master's in business administration and clinical psychology, I today wish to talk about healing. So, quite naturally, at least in my understanding, when we talk about healing, we naturally need to address the wounds or the woundings. We need to address what caused the wounds or the woundings in order to bring about healing. Because unless a wound or a wounding is there, healing is not required. And like it said, whatever we need to heal, first we need to feel it, then to be able to deal with it, then to be able to heal it. And in a way that in itself tells us that we are so disconnected from our feelings and thereby our senses that we find it difficult to heal. Because whatever we are not feeling, we can't deal with it. Or maybe because we can't deal with it, we can't feel it, and thereby we can't heal it. Now let's take a moment to sit with that and to let that sink in. Now, coming back to where I started from, that healing is only possible when we address the wounds, when we look at the wounds and the woundings. Because it's only when we address it, when we observe it, when we pay attention to it, we get connected to it. And only when we connect can we address and dress it. So let's consider the example of wound or woundings, which happens in both physical and psychological levels, which is emotional and mental levels. And since the root word of psyche is soul, the wounding also happens on the level of the soul. It's the soul wounding as well. And if we can consider the examples of physical wounds, we all know that it takes time to heal. Even on the physical level, it takes time to heal. And of course, when it's healing, it's not easy. It's not a smooth ride. So when I say it's not easy, it's not a smooth ride, what exactly does it mean and what does it look and feel like? So let's consider an example when a part of our body gets cut. That of course hurts. That of course causes pain. And we need to look at it, we need to observe it. And of course, it can take a couple of days to a few days for that cut, that wound to get healed. And while that's happening, it burns at times, it stings at times. When the new skin is forming, it starts to feel a little tight. It starts to feel uncomfortable. And many times we would find ourselves rubbing or scratching that part, which of course causes a little more discomfort, at times stinging sensations even. And at times even if you're not gentle and yet firm enough with our scrapping and scrubbing and rubbing that particular body part where the cut or the wound had happened, we might scrap off the skin all over again, making it bleed all over again, which of course replays the cycle of feeling the pain all over again, till it again starts to close, till it again starts to harden, to tighten, to feel a little more dry. And then over a period of time, it begins to form and come into a new skin. Now say supposedly, unfortunately, we meet with a bigger accident, maybe a fracture happens, maybe a deeper wounding happens. It still takes a lot longer. And we do feel all of the earlier mentioned things for a little longer. Any pain or wounding asks us to slow down. It disrupts our regular way of functioning. And having gotten used to living in a fast-paced world and a fast-paced life where most things are automatic, it demands a little more energy of us to start sitting with the discomfort of that, which causes some amount of psychological distress, which doesn't feel comfortable, which is not easy to live and to feel and to deal with, further aggravating our levels of frustration, our levels of annoyance, our levels of anger, and even our levels of resentment, both towards the thing that had caused the cut and towards our own selves also for not being careful enough. Which is why healing, or at least the process of healing, requires courage to sit with the discomfort, to feel the discomfort, to be in the discomfort, to be able to deal with the discomfort, to enable us come out on the other side of this pain and this discomfort. It requires us to address what has not been addressed, to see, to observe, to look at what has been overlooked, what has not been paid attention to bring it to close quarters what has been pushed aside. And many a times we are able to look at and to address our physical wounds much more easily, or comparatively more easily, because it's more tangible, because it's more reachable, because it's more physically addressable, because physically we cannot deny it, because physically we cannot overlook it, we cannot overstep it or step aside of it. Because to a level also, physically we know the timeline that we'll need to slow ourselves down for us to allow this wound to heal itself. And yet, unfortunately, many a times, we do not address our psychological, our emotional wounds in the same way. The woundings of the soul, the psyche, in the same way, because it's not tangible, because it's not seeable, it's not viewable, and thereby it's easier to dismiss it, to push it aside, to overstep it, to ignore it, and to even abandon it. And when we do that, invariably we are abandoning ourselves and we are ignoring our own selves. So let's consider another example of the psychological wounds and the movies that I can think about with regards to psychological wounds or emotional wounding are Tare Zameen Par, Chak De India, Three Idiots, PK, and Toilet Ek Prem Katha. So when we consider any or all of these movies, be it Tare Zameen Par, be it Chak De India, be it Three Idiots, be it PK, or be it Toilet Ek Prem Katha, there is no physical wounding as such, or at least a major physical wounding as such. And yet we can see the emotional wounding, yet we can see the wounding, yet we can feel the wounding, sense the wounding on the soul, on the level of individual and interpersonal psyche, on the level of relational psyche, wherein the parent's distress causes distress in the child, within the child, or even the children, and thereby causes distress, relational distress, in the relationship itself, both on personal and interpersonal levels, wherein every party on some level feels like a victim and every party on some level feels like the perpetrator, feels like the abuser, wherein the parents on some level in the movies Tare Zameen Par, Three Idiots, PK, and Toilet Ek Prem Katha comes across as the one who's not able to understand their own kid, not able to understand their own child, and thereby through their own bias is creating distress into the child, into the relationship with the child. So of course through this lens, the child feels that the parent is too controlling, is too domineering, and maybe even abusive, and not understanding them. It is here that the child or the children do not feel safe staying close to their grown-ups, staying in close proximity to their grown-ups. And yet through the other lens, the parents feel that the child is misbehaving, that the child is not paying attention to them, that the child is not listening to them, that the child is being disobedient and disrespectful, and thereby through their lens the child becomes the abuser and the parent themselves feel like a victim. It is here wherein the disconnection happens. It is here that the misunderstanding happens. And it is exactly here when both the parties do not feel heard, seen, and understood that the wounding happens. The woundings on the level of the emotions and the woundings on the level of the psyche, the soul. And if we take the example of the movie Chak De India, wherein this coach who was training the girls on a national level to play at the international level, at one point in time when he used to play for the country, had been psychologically wounded. And that wounding wounding runs so deep that even after so many years, he decides to address the wound. He decides to heal the wound by walking towards the wound itself and not walking away from it. By walking towards the path that had caused the wounding and not by turning his eyes, his head, and his senses away from it. He addresses it. He feels it. He deals with it in order to heal it. And it's the emotional wound, it's the mental wound. It's the wounds that are intangible. It's the wounds that are not visibly seeable, viewable, that actually run deeper than the tangible wounds. For they get ignored, they get unaddressed for the longest time possible. And from all of these movies, if we just consider 3 movies, Tare Zameen Par, PK, and Toiletic Prem Katha, we'd also notice that the wounds are both personal and interpersonal, and thereby they need to be addressed both on personal and interpersonal levels. They need to be seen, they need to be talked about, they need to be heard, they need to be felt, they need to be made sense of, to be able to address them, to heal them. Which is where we'll also notice that healing towards the end of the movie, or at least as it's shown in the movie, happens when all of the people walk towards the place which has caused the wounding, walking towards the wound itself. They open themselves up. They communicate what has not been communicated, what has not been addressed, what has been pushed aside. They finally bring it to the front. And of course, it's uncomfortable. Of course, it's not pleasant. Of course, it feels a little painful. Like when the parents, or let's not even call them parents, like these 2 individuals who are grown-ups in the movie and are parents to this kid, have to see their own flaws, have to address that it was their distress that was creating distress within the relationship and within their own children. Had to take notice of that to be able to take notice of their own kid, of their own blood, for the blood relation to heal. Likewise, in the movie PK and in the movie Toiletic Prem Katha, the parties had to walk towards each other. The grown-ups in the movie, or at least the parents in the context of the relationship as the grown-ups, had to check in into their own behaviors, into their own thought processes, into their own belief systems, which they were so enmeshed with that they were willing to abandon their own kids, but not willing to abandon their belief systems, were willing to have a bloody relationship, but not heal the blood relationship for the sake of their own belief system. And in order to heal on the personal and the interpersonal relational level, they had to look at their belief system that had caused distress within the relationship, within themselves as well, to question the belief system to a degree, to then be able to reform their thoughts, thereby the belief system, and thereby reform their relationship as well, which led to healing. And so to a degree, healing requires courage of confronting, courage of observing, courage of seeing, courage of accepting, courage of taking accountability, and courage of probably even giving up the belief systems, the thoughts that cause disconnection, both on personal and interpersonal levels. And if emotional and psychological woundings, or the woundings of the soul, happens in interpersonal relationships, in interpersonal connections, within the context of the interpersonal relationships, healing also happens within interpersonal relationships, within the context of our interpersonal relationships. Because wounding happens through disconnection and healing happens through connections, both on personal and interpersonal levels. And just like the healing of the physical wounds, healing is not a smooth sailing process. It's not easy. It is difficult to address what has been unaddressed, what has been ignored, what has been abandoned. for it requires us to confront our own abandonment, the abandonment of the self and of the others. It requires the viewership of the neglected, of ourselves and of the others, to establish connection. And just like the physical wounds, when they start to heal, they feel a little drier. They feel prickly, they feel itchy, they feel scabby, they hurt, they prick, and they don't always feel nice. They even slow us down, which kind of disrupts our regular way of living, our regular way of automatic living, which adds to our distresses. Healing doesn't always feel nice, but if we need to heal, if we want to heal, we need to connect. We need to stop ignoring, we need to stop abandoning our wounds and our woundings, and thereby ourselves and others. So let's try and become aware of that if wounding doesn't feel nice, healing may not feel nice as well, because it's asking us to look at the wounds first, to deal, to feel, to deal with the wound first, in order for us to heal. Let that sit with our awareness, with conscious awareness. Let's understand that healing requires courage, that healing requires vulnerability, that healing requires connection, both on personal and interpersonal levels. Let's try and sit with that. Let's try and think about that. Let's try and feel that. Let's try and reconnect so that we don't leak and bleed within ourselves and onto others as well. Let's try and do that for ourselves, and I will see you once again the next week. Till then, stay tuned in. And guys, if you do like the contextual content of these videos, please do like, share, and subscribe.